What's up, everyone? We're back with another episode of the Dub Jellison Podcast. I have a very special guest, Mr. Charlie Kimball. Charlie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Oh man, I'm hanging in there. We're actually in quarantine. The guy that you were talking to before, he's COVID positive. So I've been around him. He's like one of my best friends here at my fraternity at Purdue. So we're kind of, I don't know, we're just kind of chilling right now. I've been negative so far, but I know it's a matter of time before I'm positive. So how have you kind of been handling this whole COVID-19? Obviously, both of us being type 1 diabetic, we're more at risk to have like serious complications from it.
It's been tough. I think it's been tough for so many people in so many different walks of life. Our quarantine and shutdown starting in the middle of March looked very different, I think, than a lot of people's, in that my wife and I welcomed our second child into our family in the middle of March. So literally our son was born. I flew down to St. Pete for the first race. It got canceled. Postponed, turned around, flew home, and went into quarantine, lockdown, stay at home as a family of four for the first time. So it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise, if you want to look at it that way, because it was kind of an unexpected paternity leave for me. I'd expected to be traveling to and from tests at Barber, at Richmond, in Indy, different races in Long Beach and Alabama and St. Pete, and Austin as well. And so to get that time at home was really a blessing. I'm not going to say it was easy. I don't think anyone who had any stay-at-home order or any shutdown like that would have said it was easy managing that. Trying to have two kids under, at that point, 18 months old with a newborn, and not really any help because my parents are in California, couldn't really travel. My mother-in-law is really high risk as well, like I was. So we were really trying to be careful about staying home and staying safe. And over the last couple of months, since we've gotten back to racing and gotten really comfortable wearing face coverings and masks, not only at work, but also in our everyday lives, going out to the grocery store, going out to the store, going to the race shop, and just everybody being comfortable wearing face coverings, I think has been really important for us within the Indy Car series to keep rolling, so to speak. And so it's been unique. I think one of the things for me managing my type 1 diabetes with that quarantine aspect was trying to stay active. Figuring out how to, I don't know if you can see over my shoulder, set up it was going to be a temporary, and I think now it's going to be a more permanent workout room at home. We moved houses in July after a lot of that stay-at-home order, those restrictions were lifted. And so setting up a workout room was really important for me, because being able to continue to make good choices nutritionally, but also stay active, work with Fit training, and figure out how to do what I could while I was at home, because we never knew when we were going to get the call and say, hey, we're going racing in 2 weeks. 2 weeks isn't a lot of time to get physically ready to go get back in an Indy Car for an Indy Car race. So I think that was the big thing about my side, was figuring out how to stay in a routine with active and activity and exercise, but also just kind of roll with the punches, because no one really knew what it was going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely in crazy times, and I know it's crazy for you and all other professional athletes. You guys don't really know what's going on. First of all, congratulations on your son being born.
Thank you.
And then you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the things you do for like a workout regimen? How often do you do like strength and conditioning work and things of that nature?
So it's really seasonal. Just like driving a race car is very seasonal. The workouts that Jim and Alex at PitFit were designed for us as drivers are really tailored to the time of year. This time of the year, like I was in the gym this morning, and I mean, it was a nice, easy, not easy, but 500-600 calorie workout, but it was more of a recovery circuit. We were working towards a target heart rate that was only 75-80% of my max, with the idea that coming off a double header at Mid-Ohio, that in Saturday's race, I burned 1,500 calories. In Sunday's race, I burned 1,300 calories. Practice on Saturday, I burned 500 calories. Qualifying, I burned probably 100 to 200 calories. So you look at all that compounded fatigue, despite the fact that they were there working on a Saturday night and then getting some rest yesterday, still coming into the gym, there's some accumulated fatigue there. So we didn't want to go too hard. So there are more this time of the year with back-to-back races and multiple races. There's more recovery work. So more cardiovascular, more reaction training worked in. Building up to races, we do more cardio, we do more circuit training, we do more endurance, we do more reaction training. Now, the checkered flag flies in St. Pete at the end of August. Come Halloween, we're going to be strengthening. So we do a lot more resistance training. We do a lot more heavy workouts, a lot more bigger weights, a lot more what we call kind of meathead workouts, where it's just like bench, squat, pull-ups, push-ups, that sort of thing, and not as much endurance work. And so especially in the early phase of the winter, we're working to rebuild that strength that's atrophied over the course of the year, firstly, and to build a foundation that when we start doing endurance work, we have the muscle mass to sustain that endurance on back-to-back weekends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I hadn't really thought about how you guys would do that, being Indy Car drivers. I want to take a step back. I want to talk about when you were diagnosed. You were diagnosed at 22. Actually, the funny thing is, I was talking to was it your sister that I set this up with?
My wife, Kathleen.
Your wife. Okay. So on Friday, so when this is going to release, is actually the 17-year mark of when I was diagnosed.
Oh, congrats. Happy diversity.
Thank you. So I was diagnosed when I was 3. I think it's a lot harder for people, like obviously you were diagnosed at a fairly late age, I guess you could say, to try to make that transition. So what was that moment like when you were diagnosed, and what led up to that moment, and how did your life kind of change?
Well, so it's interesting that you think being diagnosed later in life is harder. I think, especially now as a parent, being diagnosed as a kid has got to, as a young child, let's say, that 3, 4, 5, 6 range has got to be so challenging. Because at 22, I was a racing driver. I was an athlete. So I understood good nutrition. I understood good exercise. I understood listening to my body and trying to make it perform the best as possible. So it's not like I drank excessively, not like I smoked. It's not like I was, overweight. It's not like I'd never been in a gym. So for me, the lifestyle transitions were easier. It was about perspective, really, for me. It was about looking at the glucose numbers and figuring out how to balance that with my insulin doses. I've been really fortunate to have a great relationship and a great partnership with Novo Nordisk for over 12 years now, in our 12th season in racing together. And it's kind of unprecedented. It's really neat for me to have that relationship with them. And I've been on their insulin since I was diagnosed in 2007. So this year will be my 13th diversary. So you obviously have a few more years on me and a couple more years experience managing your blood sugars. And looking at that, people always say, oh, well, how do you know what to do? And for me, it's a visual of a balance scale. On one side, you have things that raise blood sugar: stress, adrenaline, dehydration, fatigue, carbohydrates, in any form, carbohydrates, breads, sugars, juices, fruits, sickness, illness, things like that. And then on the other side, you have things that lower blood sugar. Oh, and I guess on the raised blood sugar, we talked about workout just a minute ago, and those heavy lifting days tend to bring my blood sugar up. Sprint workouts bring my blood sugar up. On the other side, things that lower my blood sugar, obviously insulin, but hydration, low low impact activities. If I go for a run for an hour, keep my heart rate 130 to 150, it burns blood sugar off. Workouts that are more circuit based and more endurance based, my blood sugar tends to burn off. So finding that balance scale, it's not, I think a lot of people within the diabetes community, at least from what I understand, look at that number and there's so much judgment attached to it, right? There's so much, hey, I'm doing a good job because my number is good, or I'm doing a bad job because my number is bad. And I don't think that's the case. For me, it's a question of that scale's just not quite in the range I want it to be. I work really hard. I'm not always successful. I will admit, I'm not always successful, but I work really hard to look at that number and say, that's just a number. That's just a road sign of what I need to be doing. If that number's on track and I've done my workout for the day and I'm in the office for the rest of the day, I don't need to have a little margin, and I don't need to have, and that number's on track, I don't need to do anything. But if it's a little higher than I want it, and I'm going to the gym and I know it's going to burn off, I let it ride. Things like that. People say, especially in the race car, they say, oh, what do you want your number to be? It's like, on lap 1 or lap 200, because those are two different numbers that I'm okay with. Mm-hmm. And do I want it climbing? Do I want it falling? Do I want it flat? It's such a dynamic condition to manage because life is so dynamic, right? And I always say that for me, I'm the son of an engineer. We talked about it earlier. My dad's a very successful engineer. I definitely think like an engineer. In my world, 1 + 1 always equals 2. With diabetes, 1 + 1 often equals banana. Like it doesn't always make sense. And so for me, understanding that, it kind of doesn't make sense. If I did the same thing 5 days in a row, I'd probably get 4, maybe 5 different results. And not judging the job I did based on those results, I think has helped me in life, but also in racing. Because I can look back at, this last weekend, we didn't have great results, but I can look back and think about the job I did and try, not always successfully again, but try and separate the effort and the performance of me as a driver and the results itself. Sorry, that was a long answer to a question about my experience getting diagnosed. And I remember, if we go back to that day, obviously with you diagnosed at 3, you probably don't have really clear, lucid memories of what that looked like. And I remember very vividly my first insulin injection. I remember, I am still terrified of needles. Like,
really?
Giving blood, I can't look. Like every year at the Indy Car medical, I'm like, oh God, we got to do blood again. Okay. I'm going to focus on the doctor or the nurse whoever's not taking the blood. I'm going to focus over here. I'm going to have a whole intense conversation. My whole mind is over here and I'm going to ignore what's happening on my right arm. I can't. Well, needles are not my thing. But when I gave my first insulin injection, it's like, okay, I can do this. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think the real value in having something I loved, like racing, like driving, like being at the racetrack, being a part of a team, was such a good motivation to figure out how to overcome this challenge. Having that goal for me as a racing driver to get back in the race car helped me say, okay, I have to figure out what diabetes means. I have to figure out how to manage it. I have to figure out how to be successful so that I can get back to doing what I love. And so I was never able to ignore it. I was never able to diminish it or sweep it under the rug. I had to face it, I had to overcome it and keep managing it. But yeah, I remember a couple of funny anecdotes from my diagnosis. The doctor comes in and says, okay, I think you have diabetes. I mean, great. Can you write me a prescription for the antibiotics? I'll pick it up. I'm headed to a race this weekend. Because I I didn't know what it
Yeah.
was. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, I had some friends of families that had type 2 or were pre-diabetic, and I didn't know what it was. I was 22. I like 10 feet tall and bulletproof, right? And then the doctor came in and handed me my first insulin pen. It was a flex pen. And this one I am a little embarrassed about. I looked at him and said, "What, do you want an autograph?" Because I thought it was a Sharpie. I've since learned that, that's one of the great things about the modern advances in the treatments is how it's not it's not what it used to be, right? I mean, I hear horror stories. I'm sure you've heard them, of guys boiling glass syringes to take their insulin and using a piece of twine to clean out the needle. And now the disposable needles, I mean, I don't know what you use to manage your blood sugars, but for me, I'm on basal bolus program using pens, so multiple injections, multiple daily injection. And the syringes for that are disposable, and they're twice the thickness of a human hair. And it's from where it was, I mean, like cell phones, you look at where they were 20 years ago, and you look at where they are now, and it's the same thing in diabetes treatment. So it's definitely evolved in the last 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, like you kind of touched on it. I don't really remember anything. I don't remember the moment they told me I was diabetic. So I was only 3. The only I remember like 2 or 3 things. I remember my family coming to visit me, and they brought me this toy car, like my aunt and uncle. And then I remember the kid next to me. He had like a throat illness or something like that. That's like all I remember from the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, my mom told me I cried one time when I got my first shot. And then after that, I was mostly fine. I guess I was just used to it. Obviously, you probably weren't used to needles by the time you hit 22. But yeah, I mean, I relate a lot with what you're saying. I never really heard anyone talk about it like that though, like how you explained it.
Which piece? The sort of balance scale perspective?
Yeah, the balance scale. How it's like you don't put too much emphasis on like the number itself that is there.
And for me, I think it's a little bit like having your cake and eating it too, in that I try when the number's good, or I'm in range, or like I maybe haven't made the best nutrition choices, or I didn't get to the gym like I wanted to. Life happens. Like, let's be honest, life, especially with 2 kids, life happens. And when I look at that number and it's good, I celebrate it. But when it's not good, I don't beat myself up about it. And again, that's the goal. I'm not always successful. My wife will tell you 100% I'm not always successful with that. But that's the idea, is that my endocrinologist has worked with world-class athletes. She's won Olympic gold medals. She successfully argued in front of the International Olympic Committee for a swimmer with diabetes to compete. And her perspective to me, I've always said she's a great scientist, an incredible scientist that has a great bedside manner as well. And she said to me, "Look, Charlie, I don't want you to try and be perfect every day, because you will burn out in 3 days and you will have worse outcomes than if you're pretty to really good most all of the time." Mm-hmm. And if we can work to get really good most all of the time, then that's progress. And she said, my job as a doctor is to give you those tools and educate you and work with you to figure out how to get there. Because if you try and keep your number at 105,
it's not going to happen.
That specific number, like in a day, you're going to be tearing your hair out, and it's not realistic. And I think as a driver and as an athlete, the activity is so important. I find that it's not just diabetes management, but it's mental health management. It's physical health management. I try so I work with an exercise physiologist he's now on staff at Michigan State. I started with him when he was doing his PhD work at Texas A&M at the Huffines Institute. And he talks about, he and his professors and mentors and the different institutes talk about exercise as medicine. And I think that's so important with that perspective, because he said, rather than take the elevator, take the escalator. Rather than take the escalator, take the stairs. Rather than drive, bike. Rather than bike, walk. And if you can make those daily choices to just be a little more active, it makes such a difference, and I think as a parent, I think I've learned more about myself teaching my kids than I ever did any other way. Which I know makes me sound like such a dad, but I'll own it. Now my dad jokes are just jokes, so I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, backing up to, you kind of mentioned how you handle your diabetes in terms of the injections and stuff. Have you ever considered getting an insulin pump? Because for me personally, I have the Dexcom and an insulin pump, and they work really well. I'm going to transition to a new pump and get the T-Slim, so the Dexcom and that one work together. But I was curious about how you, do you have I think you have a Dexcom, right?
Correct. So my diabetes world is a Dexcom G6. And I'm kind of a dinosaur, I think, in that I use both the receiver and the phone. So I get the number on my watch, get the number on the receiver. And one of the real reasons I use the receiver is when I'm in the race car, it plugs into the car's data system. So it mounts in the nose of the car and gets plugged in. So not only do I get my blood sugar on my electronic steering wheel, it says glucose number with the number, but the timing stand in pit lane and the engineers can see that number as well. So they can keep track, make sure that my body's running right, just like they make sure the car's running right. And then I use multiple daily injections. I'm on a long-acting insulin from Novo Nordisk called Tresiba that's on the race car this year, and a fast-acting insulin called Fiasp. So that's my mealtime insulin, and that was on the race car at Indy last year. And so we talk about my doctors, my healthcare team. I do think I will make a point quickly that I think diabetes management is a team sport. It's not just the patient. It's not just you and I. It's our endocrinologists. It's our diabetes educators. It's their nutritionists. It's their device trainers. It's also our support team at home. For me, it's my wife. It's my kids that keep me sane. It's my friends. It's my parents. It's my sister, my family. I think those teams, it takes all of that to successfully manage diabetes. And so my healthcare team and I talk about advances. We talk about the pumps. And I know that there are a lot of people who've gone from pens to pumps and it's changed their life for the better. I also have met people who go from pens to pumps and hated being connected to something all the time and wanted to go back to pens. And I get asked this question a lot. And my endocrinologist, funny story, my endocrinologist is one of three people in the world I'm afraid of. One is my wife, the other one's my mother, and then my endocrinologist. And I don't know what it says that they're all three women. I think that I'm a smart individual, but at the same time, I got asked this question, and she was in the audience, and she stood up and said, from a doctor's perspective, she's really happy. Firstly, and most importantly, she's happy with my care. She's happy with my A1C number. She's happy with my limited hypos. She's happy with how the outcomes in my diabetes management work with pens. And for me, I'm a huge proponent that there is no one size fits all in diabetes management. Mm-hmm. It's not about this is the golden bullet or the silver bullet, excuse me. This is the golden ticket that will fix everyone's management problems. Everyone's different. The world is different. Even, in the last 6 months, the world's changed dramatically. And I think everyone's management has had to and should have evolved with that. And the final reason is the pens work for me in the race car. I was giving a presentation. I was talking to a group of kids and their families with type 1 for Novo Nordisk, and a young boy stood up and said, I wear a pump, but I take it off when I ride roller coasters. And I thought, well, I drive a roller coaster. I mean, at some racetracks, we see as many Gs as the Apollo 11 astronauts saw on launch. We see 3, 4, sometimes 5 Gs laterally, vertically. I don't know if a pump would handle that. I don't know how the insulin in the pump would handle being under my fire suit. I mean, this last weekend at Mid-Ohio, when I talked about how many calories I burned during the course of the race, I lost 5 pounds in body weight through sweat. I mean, I wrung my Nomex undershirt out after the race. I mean, it's nasty.
Yeah, it's gross.
But I don't, yeah, real gross. I don't know how the insulin would handle that temperature under my fire suit. So if it's not broken, don't fix it. It works for me. And I think that's the most important thing is we've figured out the tools, the insulins, the monitors, all the different meters to work in my life as a racing driver in an Indy car that's training and traveling. Somebody else, an Olympic swimmer, an endurance cyclist, someone who's in an office 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, or working remotely now, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And then on the weekends, just goes to the park or the zoo with their kids. Their management needs and requirements are going to be very different than mine. So I'm a huge proponent that there is no one size fits all in diabetes management. And if you can figure out the tools to manage it for you with a goal in mind, again, I think for me, being a racing driver was that goal, that carrot. Having that goal in mind and having the right tools is the path to success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, 100%. I was just curious about how you guys, like you and I know Connor Daly is also diabetic. I was just curious how you guys managed that. So when you're actually in the race and say your blood sugar is going to like 70, like going low, how do you fix that? Like, I guess, how do you adjust your blood sugar and taking insulin if needed or eating something if needed during the actual race?
So in race management, just like during season training, all of that starts in the off season. Mm-hmm. I think it comes back to during the winter when I'm building that fitness. I'm also building a continued education of my diabetes. Because as I get older, as my training changes, as the race car changes and the physical requirements of us as drivers change, my diabetes management has had to change and evolve as well. So all those, I mean, we talked about how dynamic diabetes is. 1 + 1 = banana. It's evolving all the time. So that education in the off season really comes into play during the season. And it comes down to the education, the data from my my continuous glucose monitor, from my Dexcom, all of my insulin doses, all of that data, plus the physical training data coming into showing up at the race. And from the moment I get up in the morning, I'm getting my body ready to go compete. The mechanics spend hours making sure the Indy car is ready to go. They spend hours making sure that every nut and bolt is tight, making sure that every fluid is topped off, that everything is perfect. And I've got to be doing the same thing with my body. So not only when I get up in the morning, am I taking my insulin dose, but I'm fueling my body with good nutrition. In fact, my pre-race meal it's not super exciting. It's not particularly tasty, but it's the right fuel for my body to go race. It's weighed and measured, carb counted, protein counted, fat counted. I know about the insulin dose that I take for it based on certain numbers and windows. So that when I get in the car, ideally, and if you'll forgive the dad joke and pun here, but diabetes is just along for the ride. My blood sugar is in a range I'm happy with. I check it kind of as often as I check fuel mileage on a normal race. And it's just kind of there. but I do have backup plans. So with my blood sugar number, I aim to start it a little higher than I normally do on a day when I'm in the office or even a day I'm in the gym. I run about 150 to 175. So I like a little higher number so that I have a range to fall. I don't like to be any lower than 95, even 100 in the race car, or any higher than 200, 220, because I start to see vision, focus, concentration issues above that number. And my reaction time's slow as well. So it's not as much about safety when I'm higher. It's more about performance. And so I aim for that higher band. And then I keep an eye on what it's doing during the race. I think having that diagnostic piece with the CGM in the cockpit is important, but also knowing my insulins, knowing the predictability, knowing my experience in the off season with them, and having that data factor into my, again, engineering minded equation, getting in the race car, means that when I'm in the cockpit, I have confidence in what I've done ahead of time. Now, the backup plan I talked about, most drivers have a drink bottle in the car so they can stay hydrated throughout the race. I talked about how sweaty Mid-Ohio was. It wasn't even that hot. The Indy GP on July 4th was roasting. And, I was dehydrated for a couple of days. And so having that drink bottle is really important. My IndyCar difference from everyone else's in that I have 2 drink bottles, one for water for hydration and a second one full of orange juice with extra sugar in it. Now those 2 bottles come together at a valve that my dad, who's an engineer, designed. We got 3D printed. It mounts right here on my seat belt. From that valve, a tube runs into my helmet. And other than the 2 bottles, the 2 tubes and the valve, my drink system looks just like any other IndyCar driver's drink system. But that second drink bottle and that valve allows, if my blood sugar is starting to fall below or faster than I want it to, I talked about it being dynamic. Lap 1, I'm looking for a certain number. The last lap, I'm looking for a certain number. I'm okay with a bigger range. Then I have that ability to flip that valve, get some of that glucose-rich fluid into my system, and get my blood sugar to flatten out and stay where I need it to.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had any moments where it kind of dropped way too low and you might have had to stop racing, or does that even go through your mind, or do you just keep going?
So I've always said that I understand it's not just my safety on the track. If I was doing a solo time trial and I was the only one on track, I would be less cognizant of it. But when I'm on track and there's 22 other drivers like this last weekend, or at Indy when there's 32 other racers out there, I have to understand it's not just my safety, it's the other drivers, plus all the guys in pit lane and the safety team. There's a lot of people involved that are at risk if something went wrong. So I understand that I have to manage my diabetes for not only my safety and performance, but everyone else's safety as well. So if it fell to a point where I was dangerous, I would stop. If that drink mix wasn't working, if I wasn't able to make a big enough impact on my blood sugar where it was not safe to continue, I've always said I would stop. Having said that, all of the work that I've done, the preparation, has meant that it's never gotten to that point. And as a result, I'm over 150 IndyCar races in over a decade, 10 Indy 500s under my belt. As an IndyCar race winner, a pole sitter, a track record holder at Texas, that for me, I feel really good about the job I've done in preparation so that at the end of the day, I can just focus on driving and doing the best I can to go try and win races.
Yeah, I mean, that's super impressive because for me, I used to play baseball and I'd have lows all the time. I remember going up one time I was hitting and I was in between pitches, I was throwing Skittles in my mouth. So, I mean, that just speaks to how dedicated you are to making sure that you're healthy and how much, you talked about it, how much preparation goes into just every single day.
And I think it's something my wife says to me, that she said, you make it look easy from the outside.
Yeah.
I don't know that a lot of people understand how challenging it is. Because like walking down the street, you and I, like we could wave at each other, pass each other. And without this conversation, we wouldn't know that either of us, that we're both part of this cool kids club that has type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
And if I do a really good job and I work really hard to make it look easy, I work really hard so that there is no impact in my performance. I work really hard so I'm not adding burden to the race team. I work really hard to make sure that when I get on the racetrack, I'm just like those other drivers trying to go out and win the race, and give myself the best opportunity to do that. I worked really hard to make sure that that playing field is as level as possible, despite the fact that I've got a freeloading pancreas. Yeah. So that, I think a lot of people do understand that, or don't always see that. Excuse me, I misspoke there.
So how have people in the racing community kind of taken to your diagnosis? Like, I know a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about type 1 diabetes and what it is. So how did the racing community kind of embrace that, both you and Connor? And what did they, like when you were first diagnosed, what did they think about that? And what does some of the other drivers think about it now?
Well, I can't really speak to Connor's experience. I haven't talked to him a whole lot about it. But when I was first diagnosed, I got some really good advice from a manager at the time. And he worked with motorcycle racers, and they're always breaking themselves. They're always crashing and something. And he said, treat it like an injury. Say, getting diagnosed and being unhealthy. My blood sugars were so high when I was diagnosed. I was so unhealthy. I'd lost 25 pounds in 5 days. So my body just wasn't what it should be and needed to be as an athlete. And so he said, treat the recovery like an injury. And yes, you're going to have to manage this your whole life, but it's not going to get in the way. At the moment, it's just an injury that's keeping you from getting in the car. Just like if you had a broken arm or a broken wrist or a concussion, something like that. And so that injury recovery perspective really helped me initially. And because I had to miss a couple races at the end of my season in 2007 when I was diagnosed, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't not talk about it. I had to say, I'm not racing because I got sick and I have this injury, and I will get back on track. And so that really helped. And then when I first came to Indy Car for my first Indy Lights medical, I went in with all of my food logs, all my blood sugar graphs. I went in with my endocrinologist, Dr. Peters, on speed dial. And the doctor, Dr. Olinger, he said at the time, he said, we at Indy Car don't know as much about your diabetes as you obviously do. And you are prepared to do it right. And we're excited you've chosen Indy Car as a vehicle for your message. Indy Lights and the road to Indy, and then Indy Car in 2011. And so that really gave me the confidence, because I said, look, I know that if my blood sugar is not right, it's not just my safety. And I think they really appreciated that perspective and mentality going into getting in a race car with diabetes.
So what are some things that you do, like any charities that are under your name, foundations, anything like that, to try to help specifically young kids with type 1 diabetes? I know there's the JDRF. Is there anything that you're involved in, like, along those lines?
So I love doing work within the diabetes community. I've been very fortunate. I talked about the length of the relationship with Novo Nordisk and the Race with Insulin program that we've built over the last decade plus. We've met thousands of people, and I've gotten to not only share my story, but more importantly, hear their stories. And for me, hearing other people's diabetes stories helps inspire me on and off the racetrack. Being able to do work and talk to kids. And one of my favorite anecdotes is a few years ago now, but we were in Alabama, and we invited a group of young people with type 1 and their families out to the racetrack. And I showed them my race car and my fire suit and my steering wheel and where my blood sugar number was, and I had lunch with them. And I headed off to a meeting and then went to the autograph session. And this mom had waited in the autograph line, came through and picked up a hero card. And she said, I just want to share with you, Charlie, that my son was diagnosed 6 months ago. So it's kind of new for him, new for us. And signups came for Little League last week. And as a baseball player, historically you can understand what that's like. And we asked our son if he wanted to play baseball. And Brian said, I have diabetes now. I'm not sure I want to. And the mom said, I didn't want to push him. We as parents didn't want to push him because we didn't know enough to really support his decision either way. She said, but after you went to your meeting after lunch today, Brian turned to me and said, Mom, do you think we could stop at the store on the way home and pick up a glove that fits? And do you think you could still call and get me on a Little League team this year? Because if Charlie can drive a race car, I can probably play baseball. Yeah. And it still gives me goosebumps because now if Brian goes on to be a Cy Young Award winner and a baseball Hall of Famer, or if he just plays Little League for a year and makes a friend or two, it kind of doesn't matter. And to me, the fact that what I was able to do on the racetrack opened a door for Brian as a young boy playing baseball is almost, if not more important than anything I will ever do in a race car, as far as result-wise. And that work is really, really special to me. And I think it makes my mom proud of what I do in and out of a race car, which is really cool because I think she was always a little disappointed that I didn't go to college and get a real job and just chase the same racing dream that my dad did. But working with the Race with Insulin program has given me that opportunity. Also, you touched on the JDRF. The ADA has been really great. I've done a lot of events. In fact, I've got a tour this week. I'm taking a family. I can't remember if it's son or daughter. It's terrible of me. But the kid has type 1 diabetes, and the family bid on a opportunity to come out to the racetrack, come to the Indy 500 as my guest this year. Well, obviously, we ran the Indy 500 with no spectators. So on Thursday afternoon, I'm giving them a tour of the AJ Foyt Racing shop. They're going to get a chance to meet my engineer, some of the mechanics, see the race car, see the engine, see how it all works behind the scenes. And I'm really looking forward to it. I hope they are, because it's a great chance for me to share and pull the curtain back a little bit on what the wizard of being a racing driver looks like. So that those charity organizations have always been and will continue to be really important to me.
Well, I mean, you said you had goosebumps. So you were about to make me tear up. That story.
Well, I'm glad I didn't. But I mean, that's just one story. I mean, there's so many stories about the inspiration I've drawn from this great community. I call it a cool kids club, a little tongue in cheek because that way I'm cool for the first time in my life, but also because this diabetes community is so special. And, I want to share my endocrinologist. I asked her once, I said, why is it that the diabetes community is so strong? And she said, Charlie, we're not cardiac ER surgeons. We don't come in at the last minute, crack chest, start heart, save lives. We fight this thing day in, day out, every moment, every meal with our patients for their whole lives. And if we do a good job and give them the tools to do a good job managing their diabetes, there is nothing to show for it except a normal, healthy life. So it has to be a labor of love. And it turns out to be, and this incredible labor of love for healthcare team members, for family members, for people who work with suppliers, if it's insulin manufacturers, device manufacturers, strip manufacturers, people that support this diabetes community, you know, it really is a labor of love, top to bottom. And I think you see that all the way around.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important for for a lot of young kids to have type 1 diabetes. Like I know personally, I mean, I don't know a whole lot of people that are also type 1 diabetic. Through my podcast, I've met a few different people. Jordan Williams, who actually has a fight tonight. He's an MMA fighter. Gary Forbes used to play in the NBA. Obviously, you working on some other ones to try to have them on. But I think it's so important for young kids with type 1 diabetes to have someone to look up to that I mean shares the same condition that we have and goes through the same things. Because like I have 2 or 3 friends that are diabetic, maybe. I mean, I'm not super tight with them. So, I mean, it's kind of a lonely road. It's like you and your family. So if you have someone to look up to, especially when you're, 9, 10 years old, I mean, it's really, really special.
And I think it is important to have that community because, you know, I have a friend with diabetes and she and I don't talk very often, but I know if I'm having a hard day, I can text her and she gets it.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's had those hard days too. And I think having that community, that ability to reach out to somebody who gets it and really understands it is so important. You know, and I'd love to connect you. A couple of people I've met through different ambassador roles and different events. You know, when we sign off, I'll make sure to reach out through email and introduce you to a couple of people, because I think the more stories people hear and tell, the better it is for everybody.
100%. So we're about to run out of time on the Zoom meeting, but before I let you go, talk about racing at the 500. Obviously, I'm an Indiana kid, been here all 20 years of my life. So talk about that experience and then how it was different this year, obviously with no fans, and if that impacts you at all, like during the race. Like I'm assuming you don't really notice, but I mean, obviously I don't know.
So the Indy 500 it's everything. I think Allister Jr. said, you just don't know what an Indy means. And it's the single greatest, for me, race each and every year. It's the largest collection, non-religious collection of human beings on planet Earth, typically every year. Yep. And it happens in Speedway, Indiana. And I think it's the coolest thing. As a Californian Hoosier, from California, but have lived here in Indiana for a decade now, and you know, started our family here, and we got married here, and it's the only place I've ever lived where there are 5 seasons, the 4 normal seasons and the month of May. And the month of May is by far the best season of the year. And seeing fans year after year come and get autographs and talk about experiences is so special. And so this year, to not have that interaction was so strange. So strange. The racetrack and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is an incredible facility. And I think for your podcast listeners that haven't been to the Indy 500, I'm biased, I admit it, but it should be on everyone's bucket list because there's something so special about that place. And it's just a racetrack. Mm-hmm. And then you fill it with cars and teams and drivers and fans. And it has a soul and a history that goes back over 100 years, back to Ray Harun, back to racing balloons in 1909. I mean, you almost can't understand it until you've been there and seen it on a practice day, a qualifying day, carb day, race day. And so this year it just felt a little hollow. And I think, again, I'm biased, but I think the single coolest moment in sports for an athlete is driver introductions at the Indy 500. Hearing your name called and seeing that front straight that's nearly a mile long, full of people, it's so very special, so special. And this year it didn't have that same energy. And I think it was harder for us as drivers because at least I draw on that energy of the crowd, of the 300,000+ people there. And so without people in the stands, I had to draw on myself to find that extra bit of extra bit of getting up for the game, getting up for the race, getting up for the event. And so it was very different. And while you don't normally notice the fans on race day, once you're in the car, once you're racing, I noticed it a couple of times under yellow. It was so strange seeing these grandstands, just silver grandstands instead of full of people. So it was weird, and I hope that we never have to go through that again. I would encourage people to mask up and stay healthy, and I hope that your buddy who tested positive comes through it without any long-term effects, and you continue to stay negative and stay healthy. And I think the more that we do as a community and remind ourselves that we're in this together, the sooner we can get back to a new normal and get back to sporting events. If it's Colts games, if it's Dodgers baseball games, I'm a Dodger fan if you couldn't tell, and back to racetracks, back to the Indy 500 with fans, the better, because I think then we will come out of the backside of this and move forward together.
100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm going to have to wrap this up, but I mean, thank you so much for coming on. It's truly an honor to get the chance to talk to you. And I feel like I'm going to take a lot away from this conversation. It was one of my favorites that I've had so far.
Well, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the time. Thanks for having me on. And I look forward to seeing who your next guests are.
Yep, for sure. All right. Take care. Stay safe.
I will. Thank you. You too.